poverty. I mean, whatever happened? We used to watch movies making fun of people, and that was okay. We used to tell jokes and not worry about the consequences. We used to laugh at people when they shook their fist at us. Because we're America, and we don't take kindly to threats. I don't know what happened, but whatever it is, I don't like it. I don't like it one bit, and it needs to go back. We need to stop it. Stop it right now. A little more when we come back.
Ho, ho, ho! Santa Claus here! Holidays got you down? Wishing you could just get away from them for a while? Well, join my buddy Steve Long on Liberty Unfiltered Radio. Wednesday nights on Vigilant Liberty Radio. Tune in and there won't be any coal in your stocking this year. Ho, ho, ho!
Alright, everybody. We're back. Man. I bet you did. Okay, so there's a couple more fairly important things that have been in the news over the last couple of days, really. Well, just in general this week, we can start here at home, because it's the most dated piece, so we'll start there. President Obama's executive, I just said executive. I guess that's the cross between order and executive. Executive. Okay. Executive order on immigration was ruled unconstitutional by a federal judge in, I believe, Pennsylvania. Basically, an illegal immigrant was deported, and he came back illegally, and the defense attorney for that person tried to use Obama's executive order as a defense. Naturally, that didn't work out for that gentleman. And the court ruled that actually Obama's executive orders were unconstitutional. And so even after, all these 20-something times where the president said, it's not constitutional, and turns out he was right. He doesn't have the power to do all these things he thought he had the power to do. And so it's been ruled on in court once. It was a low-level federal court, so it was nothing to jump in the streets about. But at the same time, it is what it is, what it is. And I kind of feel like, and bear with me here, it's about freaking time. It is about time. I cannot even go through the list of executive orders that were unlawful for all of the presidents. All of them. Every single president. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, you name it. There are executive actions they took that are unconstitutional, unconscionable, immoral, whatever fancy pants word you would like to put on it that lines up with violating rights. Now, I know a lot of people just kind of just exhaled sharply. George Washington, no. He's the father of our country. But in reality, he was still an American president, and American presidents have one notorious thing in common. They violate your rights. Most notably in George Washington's case, the execution of soldiers trying to leave the voluntary army. It is what it is. And I'm sure there are a lot of soldiers out there who take issue with me taking issue with that, but either it's voluntary or it isn't. Although the word you're looking for is compulsory, if it's not. But Obama's executive orders on immigration obviously changing the law, obviously refusing to enforce or deciding how to enforce laws that are already on the books, and the president has a duty to faithfully and fully execute the laws of this country as passed by Congress and signed by the president, period. He doesn't get a extra vote. He doesn't get an extra constitutional power. It's not how the country works. So for whatever reason, Mr. Constitutional Lawyer himself decided to do it anyway, and the results were predictable. It was ruled unconstitutional. Who knew? But I think it's a good development. I think it's a fair development. I think it's worth noting that the first legal step in dismantling the executive orders has been taken. Some idiot lawyer, he done goofed. You picked the wrong defense, and you have kind of stepped on the president's toes in the process. So, there you go. But that's really all I have to say about that. We all know it's unconstitutional. Somebody ruled it was. It's got a lot more rulings to go before it means anything. But c'est la vie. A couple more important things that have been in the news today. Russia and Cuba. I want to talk about Cuba, because Cuba, like North Korea, is already communist. Still communist. Russia, not so much. The interesting thing about Cuba is that what we have done with our policies there is that we have created this leftist utopian bubble where communism has been allowed to fester. And our original policy was to strong-arm them into submission, and that has woefully failed. Because obviously the people in power in that country don't care if their people starve to death, if they do not have their rights. They don't care. Why should they care? They don't, so it doesn't matter. But the communists in Cuba have been allowed to teach generation after generation after generation the importance of obeying the government, the importance of unity under these tenets of communism. And because of that, they have succeeded. And you've got people like Elian Gonzalez, or whatever his name is, the little boy that was taken from his house forcibly by the Clinton administration and given to his father in Cuba. Now that guy's, he's a man, and he's a communist shill. He's a brainwashed android, and it's so unfortunate. But we have allowed this country to just fester. And I'm not saying that means we need to bomb them or something, but I think it ought to, in the least, mean that we need to do something. Cuba, however, is full of people that have good sense. There are many people there that try to prosper. They try to escape. They try to start businesses. I'm sure there are even some that try to vote against Castro, even while avoiding the death penalty for criticizing said presidente. And what I think, and what most libertarians believe in terms of Cuba, is that if we open up our borders, if we open up trade, if we allow Americans to come and go in Cuba, sure, the economy will flourish. Sure, you'll be allowed to get what you need. You'll be allowed to trade. You'll be allowed to make money. You'll be allowed to buy property. You'll be allowed to do whatever it is Cuba decides to allow you to do. But what inevitably will happen, because it has to, is that Cuba will become more attached to and more a part of the modern world. And what's great about the modern world, what's great about modern technology and modernism in general, is that the transmission of ideas is so much faster. It's so incredibly fast that somebody, no matter how far away they are, they can speak to you, or at least communicate with you from the other side of the planet, from the complete opposite end of the planet in many, many cases. And what Korea lacks, on top of communication, is food enough to labor. Everything else seems to be coined and destroyed. Just being done with it. And that, I find to be reprehensible. I can't believe that for so long we have had this policy in America of shutting the borders, of disconnecting from the people, and limiting the flow of ideas that could have liberated these people. Long, long ago, these people could have been free. They could have overthrown Castro. What they needed was a liberty mindset. They needed to be liberalized. And I say that as a big L, liberalized, not a little L, modern Democrat liberalized. I'm talking about founding fathers' freedom, responsibility, liberalized. My rights come from myself. My government gets its right to govern from my permission to allow it to do so. And we have not helped Cuba get those ideas, get that information, because we've closed ourselves off from them. And we've closed them off from the rest of the world where they might get these things. It's just unfortunate. Terribly, terribly unfortunate. But luckily, if Congress looks into it, and if John Boehner changes his mind from his stupid position to a good one, Cuba might very well be opened up to us, and Cuba might very well be able to get themselves what they need. The information they need. Even if it's the information to rebel, even if it's the information to defend themselves in some form or fashion. Any of that would be just fine. But we have prevented these folks and not allowed them to get what they need. And that's, hopefully Congress will get it together and help that change. But we shall see. We don't know what's going to happen yet. It is what it is, what it is. Lastly, there's one last thing I want to talk about tonight before we head out, and that is Russia. Russia has been in the news a lot this week. First, the rupee takes a nosedive. Their form of money takes a nosedive in comparison to ours. Ours has stayed the same while theirs has dropped in value. That's why it always hurt. That's why the scabbard rattling and the strong rhetoric between old Cold War foes continues on to this day. And it's just this back and forth nonsense for the most part. But I'd like to clarify some of it a little bit. Now, many of you may have watched the news today, and many of you may have heard what Putin said. Most likely, many of you did not. Most likely, many of you only heard the American side of it. And what's important to note about foreign relations, about international relations, is that any time you are dealing with two nations and you live in one of them, you are always going to get the point